Friends, welcome and good afternoon. I'm Reverend David Schwartz, minister here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. And whether you have been here for decades or just entered through our doors the very first time today or are returning for the first time in a long time, I welcome you into this house of memory and hope. Here in this place, let us call upon that which is most high, known by many names. God, breath of life, spirit of love, human family, abide with us and comfort us and bless us in this hour. Help us just for a little while to set down the masks that we wear to face the world. Help us to make space for ourselves to mourn, to lament, to cry, to wonder, and to celebrate and rejoice and offer gratitude for a long life well and fully lived. Help us in this place to be strong enough to open our hearts to the pain of loss. Amen. Today we are one family. Whether or not you know the people around you, we are one family bound together by the loss of Betty, united by our grief and our gratitude to be among the lives that she touched. We gather because we knew her as a partner and a beloved, knew her as a person of deep curiosity and delight, knew her as an athlete and triathlete, as a musician, knew her as a long time member of this church community. We, all of us together, those here in person and those joining online, we are the family that she made, and we are the people who she lives on through. Today, in remembering and telling her stories, we put her back together whole and healthy and vitally engaged with life. She lives in our remembering. Grief asks us simultaneously to let go of the person that we love, and just at the same time to hold her spirit in our lives. May the stories we share live on. We all grieve differently and at different times and different ways. Grief comes in waves. And sometimes it's so strong that functioning can be difficult. Other times what grief looks like is numbness, and it makes you wonder at the depths of your feeling and your love and your loyalty. And sometimes grief comes as anger and rage and despair. All of that is what grief is. But we're not gathered here in this moment today because this is the time to move on and be done. We're not gathered here to find some final and definitive answer. We're not gathered here to finish our grief, but to be in it together. We need each other. As we celebrate Betty's life and mourn her death, we are reminded that her life and ours and all of life is precious, fragile. Each week, when we gather for our Sunday services in this house, we light a flaming chalice, a symbol of this tradition of Unitarian Universalism. It's a flame and a cup, but there is a meaning that we put into it, something unseen that it reminds us of. It suggests that within our separate selves burns a flame of unity and connection and compassion, a fire of every life which has illuminated our own and which still glows in us. And once felt, that fire can't be extinguished, so we gather, weaving our lives together, lighting a common flame. A few years ago, Betty gathered with a number of other folks in this church to talk about end-of-life planning and to think about what each person wanted at their memorial service. And Jean told me that the laughter which came from those conversations surprised her. Back then, Betty asked that when we gathered for her memorial today, we sing together 3 favorite hymns of hers. And we'll stay seated and sing twice through the first, Spirit of Life. And especially if you don't know it, join in when you can. I like to think that some of the toughness and joy and fire that Betty had her whole life came because she was a Chicago kid. Born May 7th, 1928. It takes toughness and fire and joy to get a full scholarship to Northwestern as a woman in 1945. To join the Marine Corps Women's Reserve that same year when there were hardly 15,000 women in all of the Marines. In that same interval, she graduated cum laude in math and geology. She was elected to Phi Beta Kappa. She won a graduate scholarship to CU for an MS in 1956. The PhD in 85 took a little longer because she was busy. She started her work with the US Geological Survey in 1952 with mapping projects in southwestern Montana, and then went on to publish 24 geologic maps over her career that spanned 60 years as an active and then emerita geologist with the USGS. She won awards. She was a member of societies, the Tobacco Root Geological Society, Colorado Scientific Survey, a senior fellow with the Geological Society of America. It was, and it is, a beautiful and a well-spent career to contribute to our knowledge of the world, to literally map this place and its past, to be a part of building a vast and enduring monument of human knowledge. But just to say it that way doesn't tell the whole story, because she loved and delighted in what she did. Sharon Ballou told me that in 2008, soon after she and Bill moved into a new condo, they hosted the euphemistically titled Sunday Afternoon Tea House, which sounds very sedate and orderly. It was a gathering old members and new members and visitors, snacks, beverage, conversation. Betty was among the 25 people who showed up that afternoon. And Sharon said, although Betty seldom wore jewelry, she always carried her jeweler's loupe in case she spotted a beautiful rock along the way. The party is well underway, and the adult beverages were flowing. And Betty is bent over with her head laying on the granite countertop. I saw Bill join her, and I made a beeline over to them, says Sharon. Bill said that Betty had found rubies. And Betty, looking up with her loupe, laughed and said it was garnets in the granite of the countertop. And sure enough, there they were, sparkling almost as much as her smile. That's who Betty was, too. Delighted and curious and excited to discover, happy to share with others the joy of looking very closely at something half as old as the earth. That joyfulness wove through her life. She played clarinet for 70 years, first in Chicago and then 2 decades as a founding member of the Boulder Philharmonic and the Boulder Concert Band and the Broomfield Civic Orchestra. She had these old and lifelong passions and discovered new ones along the way. She was 55 when she started competing in triathlons. As a person in my 40s, I find that very inspirational. And she competed all over the world, Europe and Mexico and Australia. I hope you saw or will see the photo of her as a torchbearer with the Olympic torch for the Salt Lake City Olympics. She was bold like that. Jean told me Betty was never afraid to be out as a lesbian, even in the 70s, which is like a different geological age of LGBT rights. Never afraid. Tough and joyful and fire. The poet Mary Oliver writes this called In Blackwater Wood. She says, right of this moment in the year, look at the trees. They're turning their own bodies into pillars of light. They're giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. And the long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Friends, let's sing together again. We'll remain seated and join in singing, We Would Be One. To celebrate a life is to share stories. And that's all of our work. That's why you have a reception afterwards, so you can go and eat and tell your Betty Skipp stories. I want to share 3 that I heard from members of this congregation, and then you can add on to them afterwards. First, Tom Denkenwolf told me this. Tom said, when I was single in my late 20s and early 30s, and this was not too long ago, my family, he says, Betty was one of my most wonderful church moms. We talked regularly after church. We got to know each other more deeply in the same small group. He says, I still smile with love and deep appreciation when I retell this story about how she cared enough about me to be blunt. Tom says, I was trying to save time, so one week I decided to just comb my hair straight down. 5 seconds, done. No one said anything all week. But when I talked to Betty that Sunday, she looked at me and said, you look like a nerd. You are a nerd, but you don't want to look like one. At first, he says, I was taken aback. But I quickly realized she wanted the best for me. And so, unlike everyone else, she let me know my new look was not good. About 1 year later, I met Karina, and 2 years after that, I was so happy Betty and Jean were at the wedding. Marge McGoat told me this story. She says, October 8th, 2008, the 2 of them departed for an ecological trip to the Big Island of Hawaii. Led by a biologist from University of Oklahoma, you could sign up as a student or not, and as a student you'd have to write a paper. We went as guests. It was when the volcano was erupting. So as geologists, they're both geologists, it was exciting to be there. We hiked out to a place where you could see the lava flowing into the ocean. We hiked around all these other places. We saw the regrowth of plants after eruptions. Every morning we'd get the smog alert to see if it was safe to visit the observatory. We went to the most southern end of the Big Island where we looked for green rocks. There was a strong wind blowing, but it didn't stop Betty. She got very involved despite the fact that we needed to get back to the car. We learned about invasive species and so many other things. And at the same time, Hawaiians were having celebrations, so we took in some of those events. It was a great trip. That's her. That is discovery and curiosity, hiking out to the end of the island and learning new things well into her 80s, and celebrating, all woven together, all of those things. And Carol Saunders told me this story. She said, Betty and I were friends since about 1973. And you know, as a geologist, she mapped Idaho. I got to drive there once in her large RV she called Godzilla. And she also used a small truck with the Geological Survey sign on the door. There had been a horrific dam break some months earlier, a huge flood, and everyone was kept out by signs with dire warnings. In the middle of the wilderness there, facing this sign with no one in sight, she laughed. Ha! We can get in. We're from the Geological Survey. And put that car in a low gear and plowed over the rough road and the rocks and showed me why it failed with this brief analysis of the geology of the area. Carol says, I followed her around on our sample gathering, and I had the rare treat of her pointing out the connections between the rocks she was gathering and the very distant buttes. I can still hear her voice with that little lilt, making a detailed and serious analysis sound exciting, engaging. it wasn't just that she was interested or fascinated by the work. She wanted to share that with you. Carol says, Betty told me an adventure early in her career of having been dropped with a young female geologist intern on the top of a mountain by helicopter. The two of them were surrounded with the summer's stash of food and supplies, and there were so few female geology interns that the service liked having Betty mentor if possible. When she joined in the 50s, 2% of all employees in all of the USGS were women, let alone the people out doing field research. And she was mapping the way, but she was also mapping a career and a life for so many people who followed her. Anyway, no sooner does the helicopter disappear into the distance than a mother bear with her cubs emerges from the woods and starts pacing back and forth with her head and her tongue swinging. Betty told me how terrified she was, but she had to keep calm and she had to keep her intern from panicking. So she stood stock still among the gear and the bags and took her pocket tablet out and started writing. And apparently this worked because eventually the bear took her cubs and left. No blood spilled, and there they were for the rest of the summer. What Carol told me in that story, what you all have told me, is that we loved Betty's bright and curious mind, her deep knowledge of the earth, her adventurous spirit, physically, mentally, spiritually, her sense of humor and her infectious laugh. I only met her at the very end, a couple of years ago, the end of this remarkable life. But even in the last years, as her body slowed, you could see in her eyes, in her smile, the fire, absolutely undiminished. She joined this congregation in 1961, writing that she knew that the UU faith was appropriate for a doubting geologist who had an inexplicable spark of spirituality and a need for community. I talk sometimes here with kids and parents and elders trying to describe what kinds of lives we're trying to live in this community, and not just this community, so many of you. What kind of lives we're trying to live. I tell them that we're trying to remember to look for wonder in the most simple, ordinary things, rocks and hillsides. I tell them we try to live our life falling in love with the questions instead of any one particular answer. I tell them we try our absolute best to live our values in this world, to love always fearlessly, ferociously. I tell them we try to face the difficult, painful realities of life without pretending those things aren't real. That is the life that Betty lived, all the way up to the very end of it. And that's our work now, to carry on, to make that real. Those commitments that shaped who she was, the easy laugh and the curiosity and the fierceness, that's ours now. We'll be together in silence for a few moments. Spirit of life and love, who each of us understand and know in different ways and call by different names. Our hope, our prayer, our intention is to be people who feel the full pain of grief knowing that it is attendant to our love. Our hope, our prayer, our intention is to carry the best of who Betty was, to carry those stories into our own lives and spread that light into the world. Amen. For a person who spent their life in love with rocks, in love with this old earth, there's no better way to close than to sing just what she asked us to sing. A celebration of the beauty and the wonder of this world and the unity of all of us together on it. Will you rise in body or in spirit and join in singing? Friends, this is just the start of the stories to share and the memories to recall. I hope you'll join together afterwards in the sky room to continue. And with these words, the poet says, "To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Go in peace, and amen."